I've been really enjoying building small things recently, which is weird because if you've watched my channel for a while, I normally build pretty big projects cities, factories, all that. But lately, I've been finding these tiny buildings way more satisfying. You finish one in like 30 minutes, then suddenly you've got a little street, then another building. Then, before you realize it, it actually starts looking like somewhere people would live. I don't actually have a huge goal for today, which is kind of nice. I just wanted to keep working on this harbor, add a couple shops, make it feel a little more lived in, see where it goes. I feel like those usually end up being my favorite episodes anyway. Today I'm going to start on this little lobster roll hut that has been pretty inspired by my feed lately. I keep finding myself saving photos of places like Bar Harbor, Camden, Boothbay Harbor, all of those little fishing towns along the coast of Maine that somehow feel frozen in time. And the more I look at them, the more I wonder how they ended up looking the way they do. They're working harbors. Boats still come and go, fishermen still make a living there. So why do they also feel almost like movie sets? It turns out that wasn't really the original plan. Back in the late 19th century, cities in the Northeast were growing incredibly quickly. Places like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia had become crowded and noisy, and by today's standards, honestly, not very pleasant places to spend the summer. So wealthy families started heading north, looking for cooler weather, cleaner air, and somewhere that felt a little bit slower. They called it rusticating, which is such a funny word, but it basically meant escaping the city for a simpler life. And of course, they weren't exactly roughing it. They arrived by train and steamship, built grand hotels overlooking little fishing villages, and before long, the local economy started shifting alongside them. The fishermen never disappeared, but they found themselves sharing the harbor with summer visitors. And I think that's why these towns feel so unique and precious. They're not purely tourist towns, and they're not purely working harbors either. There is this really interesting blend of both. You'll see weathered lobster shacks sitting next to beautifully maintained inns, tiny bait shops across the street from little cafes with flower boxes in the windows, buildings that were designed to survive harsh Atlantic winters slowly becoming places people traveled hundreds of miles just to walk around in the afternoon. I think that's the feeling I wanted to capture here. Not a perfect seaside town, but somewhere that feels like people make a living. And even if somewhere along the way other people started coming simply because they thought it was beautiful. I'm going to finish off this lobster shack, and I'm going to speed through this quite a bit. I've been building this over the span of roughly 2 weeks. In fact, I've actually built most of this around a week and a half ago. But a lot has been happening in my life lately, and that's a little bit part of why this video is delayed. But the best part about building on a server is being able to share company with some people who are really interested in building, especially building in survival. So I'm here today on the Roundtable Hold, which is a server run by Di, and trying to build and get my mind off of the real world and enjoy life a little bit more, take things a little bit more thoughtfully, and just share my builds. I chose this color palette based off of a reference image of an actual lobster roll shack that I think I saw in Bay Harbor, Maine. It's this gorgeous red roof with this faded white wooden exterior, and honestly really screams lobster shack to me. It's very cute and has a lot of detail on the outside, so I kind of reinforced that by using a ton of fence gates, as in my head I'm trying to aim for those hanging buoys that are sometimes hung outside of bait and tackle shops, and then also adding some dead coral to imitate maybe some moss, or I know barnacles wouldn't grow, but kind of some weathering that's going on. I also wanted to add copper grates as almost lobster traps. I really like the idea of them being these faux pas lobster traps, and I think I'm going to wind up using the motif quite a bit through the remainder of this world. But now that this build is pretty much done, I just have the interior to do. Let's collect some materials for the next build that I have in mind. So, I've been thinking about something recently that I don't think I really appreciated until the past few months. I think you always hear the saying you're the average of the five people you spend the most time with. And every time I hear that growing up, I kind of roll my eyes. It always sounds like one of those motivational quotes that you see on an Instagram reel. But recently, I've started wondering if there's actually some truth to it. Not really because the people around you determine who you become. I really don't think they do. But they do influence a lot of what starts to feel normal. A little while ago, I went back home and met up with one of my friends from high school, and we hadn't really seen each other in probably 4 years. We'd text here and there, but that's very different from sitting down over coffee and actually catching up. And I was really excited to see him because growing up, I looked up to him a lot. He was really confident, really opinionated, and for someone our age at the time, he always seemed to know exactly what he wanted. I remember thinking in high school that this guy has his life figured out way more than I do. Then I left for college. I went pretty far from home, so I didn't come back too often. College happened, Formula SAE happened, I met hundreds of new people, graduated, moved across the country again for grad school, and I honestly don't think I realized how much I'd changed until I sat across someone who reminded me of who I used to be around. The conversation started pretty much exactly how you'd expect. What have you been up to? How was college? What are you doing now? Just normal catching up conversation. But after maybe 20 or 30 minutes, I noticed something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I was just tired. The conversation wasn't boring per se. He wasn't rude. Nothing bad had happened. I just felt drained. And honestly, I spent the drive home wondering why. I started replaying the conversation in my head. He told me about trying to find a job. Then he talked about college, then dating, then where he lived. And eventually I realized that every single story somehow landed in the exact same place. The job market, his professors, his town, other people, bad luck. There was always something outside of him explaining why life wasn't really moving forward. Now, before any misunderstandings occur, some of those things are absolutely real. The job market is tough. People absolutely get unlucky. Where you grow up does affect your opportunities. I'm not trying to pretend like we all have complete control over our lives because Lord knows I don't. But that wasn't what stuck with me. What stuck with me was that after maybe 2 hours together, I couldn't remember a single story where he talked about what he was going to do next. It was almost like every story ended the moment something outside of him happened. There was never another chapter, a retry, and I actually started wondering if I was being unfair. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe I was just at a different point in my life. But I couldn't stop thinking about why I felt so exhausted afterward. So I started reading about it. There's this idea in psychology called emotional contagion. It's basically the idea that we unconsciously absorb emotions and attitudes of the people around us. We like to think we're completely independent thinkers, but we're actually constantly mirroring other people without realizing it. Albert Bandura talked about this through social learning theory. A lot of why we learn isn't from someone teaching us directly. It's from watching how other people behave and what they expect from the world. The more I read about it, the more I started noticing it everywhere. Think about it. If one of your friends suddenly starts running every morning, It doesn't magically make you a runner, but running suddenly doesn't seem like such a weird thing to do anymore. If your roommate cooks dinner every single night, you probably end up cooking more too. If all your friends spend every weekend trying new coffee shops or exploring a city, eventually that's just what weekends feel like. Nobody convinces you, it just becomes normal. The same thing happens with the way people think. If someone gets excited talking about ideas, you usually leave that conversation feeling energized. If someone is constantly planning trips or projects, you find yourself thinking more about your own future. And if someone spends every single conversation explaining why nothing ever works out for them, after a while you start noticing the same things too. Not because they're right, nor necessarily that they convince you, but you've spent the entire time inside their worldview that your brain kind of starts treating it like familiar territory. I actually got reminded of this again recently in a situation that I'm not going to talk about because it involves people who are still in my life and it is still quite fresh. It's just not really my story to tell. But what was interesting was that I also got to see the opposite happen. I watched someone spend a lot more time around people who were social, active, taking care of themselves, eating well, going outside, trying new things. And nobody sat them down and gave them advice. Nobody said you should start going to the gym. Nobody said you should take care of your health. Nobody gave them a lecture about self-improvement. And a few weeks later, they were just doing those things. Nobody convinced them. It was because they'd spend enough time around people where that was simply normal. That honestly made me stop and think about my own life. When I first moved to New Orleans, I was pretty lonely. My parents had just left, classes hadn't started yet. I still know basically nobody here. I remember having a couple days where I was just sitting in my apartment, editing videos, going to the gym, walking around by myself, and feeling this weird in-between stage of life. But classes have started now, and I've met people in my program. We went on a field trip to a shipyard together, and I remember leaving the day thinking, I feel different. Nothing extraordinary happened. We just spent hours talking, walking around, making jokes, asking each other questions, talking about careers, engineering, my field, where everyone came from. It reminded me how much I enjoy being around people who are genuinely curious, people who want to build things, get excited about ideas, people who have plans. They're not always perfect, they're not always happy, but because spending time around them makes me like who I am when I'm with them. And I think that's a question I've started asking myself lately. Not, are these good people? Not, do I agree with everything they think? Of course I don't. The question is, who do I become after spending time with them? When I leave, do I feel curious? Do I want to learn something? Do I want to take better care of myself? Do I feel excited about my own future? Or do I leave feeling smaller than when I arrived? Because I don't think influence is usually loud, but rather something unnoticeable. It's a joke you hear enough times that you start making it yourself. It's a habit you see enough times that it starts feeling normal. It's a way of talking about the world that slowly becomes your own inner voice. Maybe that's what people actually mean when they say misery loves company. Not that miserable people want everyone else to be miserable. I know most of the time they don't. I think it's just that every single one of us is constantly borrowing little pieces of the people we spend our lives around. And if that's true, then maybe one of the most important decisions we make isn't just who we spend our time with, but choosing the people who bring out the versions of ourselves that we're actually proud to become. Let's get back to building in the meantime. I found this one house on Pinterest yet again that seemed to be this green coastal house, and inspired by the rusticator movement, I wanted to make this into an ice cream shop. I thought it would be rather fitting, and this pale green color palette I think blends really nicely. Kind of reminds me of pistachio ice cream a bit. One thing that I found really difficult while building this is that Minecraft weirdly lacks this very specific block color. We do have a lot of green blocks, and I mean a lot. I don't know the percentage, but there are plenty of dark greens and bright, colorful greens to choose from. But this faded green, kind of tealish color is heavily lacking. So I took some liberties and I staggered in some mossy cobblestone and mossy stone bricks to bring out the green, but still bring out the gray tones as well. And and due to the house shape, I wanted to make a little jut out that serves as the entrance that was on the porch and have it be a little bit raised, but not too raised, because an outdoor patio area for this ice cream shop would be really nice. And I honestly think that's what most ice cream shops I've seen have. I had quite the amount of people decide to come and visit me throughout this whole journey. Shout out to Rad Dude and Bean, who kept me company most of the time. Z had also stopped by and was sitting down and watching me build, and it was a little bit stressful to have an audience. I have been trying to focus a little bit more on building houses in shapes that I wouldn't normally think of. I think Minecraft houses obviously lend themselves very well to being blocky, and that's completely fine. Most houses in real life are blocky too. But I also think challenging how we put those blocks together is pretty important. I am a former architecture student, so form is one thing that my mind is constantly paying attention to, especially when I build in Minecraft. And I think that intersecting these different blocks in different ways makes for more interesting builds, and especially in a area that can look a little bit same, it helps to bring in a little bit of variety. So doing blocks on diagonals, which in Minecraft obviously helps with variation, and then also doing two different blocks intersecting, maybe on the front, maybe on the side, is another way to do that. And to emulate the trim that was on the corner of this house, I decided that I would actually omit having a block there and use these fences instead and frame everything out with shutters and different variations in glass, trying to add as much detail without adding too many things jutting out on the outside. I think that's the one thing that Minecraft really struggles with is there are a lot of ways to add detail to the outside of a building, but a lot of them are pretty chunky due to it being, a 1 meter by 1 meter block game. But that's half the fun in building, if you ask me. I also saw that on this reference image, there was this skeleton thing going on at the top. So I was trying to kind of go after that vibe, and it took me a few rounds of trying to figure out how to do that. Eventually I'd gotten it worked out, and I kind of made it a little bit unique and not exactly like the reference image. But if I'm going to be honest, I've found that following reference images a little bit more closely almost helps my building muscles a little bit better. I'm a lot more willing to try something new if I can see a photo from real life, and trying to recreate different aspects of real life shapes into Minecraft helps quite a bit. But I do have to get working on the interior because the exterior is pretty much done. I have the roof worked out entirely. I did also follow the other build that I did in the last video. I made this one gray house out of coral, and while I originally made the roof all of diorite and pale oak, I thought it was a little bit too white, and despite the texture of diorite, it kind of looked too clean, so I added in oak and birch, and I think that's going to become a staple anytime I do a white color palette roof. And just making the front porch a little bit more of a front porch. And we're going to create a self-service window here, or maybe an ordering window. There's this one ice cream shop that is near me that I went to recently, and they have this exterior patio in the back that's used during the fall time, because honestly in the summer it's a little bit too hot. But that patio really reminded me that it's great to have somewhere outside to enjoy ice cream, especially with all the mess. and making the inside be almost entirely function. So I don't know if you would call it the kitchen, but the area where all the ice cream gets blended up, all of the freezers that have all of the different flavors, some soft serve or frozen custard machines. And then the place that I went to has these things called spinners, which are kind of like blizzards. They're like a blended ice cream with a bunch of mix-ins. So I wanted to make this one machine in the back that kind of serves as like a blending machine with the rod that has the mixer on the bottom of it. So that's what that's supposed to be in the back, the copper thing. And I labeled it a coffee machine because I'm imagining it's like blended iced coffees that would be really good in the summer. And I'm pretty sure a few places in Bar Harbor have something similar to this. And if I'm going to be quite frank, I am a moderator on this server, so I may or may not have used a debug stick to add in some texture on top of those blocks. I just wanted the extra vibe. I completely understand that that's not something you'd be able to do in survival Minecraft most of the time. And because there was a little bit of a dead space on top, I made it into a small little bedroom, maybe. So if people wanted to come stop by and visit, it's like a almost functional place. I think I just have to add on a few finishing touches, and that serves to be just about the second building done. But I think we need a little bit something else in this area to complete this video. And I think I know just the thing to round this area out and to really leave the impression that this is some rusticator city in Maine. I should probably explain where this tugboat came from.
No, don't.
I think I have to.
It'll only make people ask more questions.
I mean, technically, you made it.
Technically.
With extraterrestrial assistance.
Allegedly.
You literally built a UFO 5 minutes before designing this.
Correlation.
Z.
Correlation.
So, naturally, when I needed a tugboat,
The aliens submitted a proposal.
we named it the Visitor.
I thought we agreed not to tell people.
Tell them what?
Exactly.